The rain had already started when Daniel Carter pulled his car into the driveway. The quiet neighborhood outside Seattle looked peaceful under the dim streetlights. But inside Daniel's mind there was a strange heaviness he couldn't explain. He had felt it for weeks now, a quiet discomfort that followed him everywhere. Work had been busy, life had been moving quickly, but something inside his home had slowly begun to feel different. He stepped out of the car, closed the door, and stood for a moment under the cool rain. The house lights were on. That meant Ethan was awake. Daniel smiled slightly. His son was the one thing that still brought him simple comfort these days. When Daniel entered the house, the warm smell of dinner still lingered in the air. The television in the living room was on, but the volume was low. Ethan sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, looking relaxed the way teenagers usually did late at night. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said, glancing up. "Hey, kid," Daniel replied, taking off his coat. "You still up?" "Yeah, homework, sort of." Daniel chuckled softly and walked into the kitchen. His counter was clean, dishes already washed. Laura had probably done it before leaving again. She had been leaving the house more often lately, always saying she had extra work or meetings. At first, Daniel didn't question it. Laura worked as a marketing coordinator for a company downtown, and busy schedules were normal. But slowly, small details began to stand out. She started dressing differently for work. Her phone was always locked, and when she came home late at night, she seemed distracted. Daniel had tried to ignore those thoughts. 20 years of marriage should have meant trust. He told himself he was overthinking things. While Daniel poured himself a glass of water, Ethan walked into the kitchen holding a tablet. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Ethan said carefully. Daniel noticed the tone. Immediately, it wasn't casual. "Sure," Daniel replied. Ethan hesitated for a moment before placing the tablet on the table. "I didn't mean to look at it," he said quietly. "Mom left it in the living room and messages popped up." Daniel felt a small knot tighten in his chest. "What messages?" Ethan looked uncomfortable now. "I think you should read them." Daniel slowly sat down at the table and pulled the tablet closer. The screen was still open to a conversation thread. At first, the messages looked normal, but the more he read, the more the words began to feel heavier. "I miss you already. Tonight was perfect. I wish we didn't have to hide." Daniel's heart dropped. The contact name at the top said, Mark.Daniel, read a few more lines. "You looked beautiful tonight. I can't stop thinking about you." For a moment, Daniel simply stared at the screen. His mind refused to fully accept what he was seeing. There had to be some explanation. Maybe it was a coworker joking, maybe it was harmless. But the tone of the messages didn't feel harmless at all. They felt intimate, private, romantic. Ethan stood across the table watching his father carefully. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan said. "I didn't want to see it, but it just popped up." Daniel slowly put the tablet down and took a deep breath. "It's not your fault," he said calmly. Inside, however, his thoughts were racing. 6 months of strange behavior suddenly began to make sense. The late nights, secretive texting, the distant conversations. Daniel rubbed his forehead and leaned back in the chair. "How long ago were these messages?" he asked. Ethan looked at the screen. "Today," he said quietly. "Some of them were from earlier tonight." That answer hit Daniel like a punch. Earlier tonight, which meant Laura might have just been with this man. The room felt suddenly quiet. The only sound was the rain hitting the windows. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked around the kitchen. Every part of the room held memories. Family dinners, birthday cakes, laughter after long days. 20 years of marriage lived inside those walls. The idea that it could all be built on something broken felt impossible to accept. Before Daniel could say anything else, headlights flashed through the front window. A car had pulled into the driveway. Ethan looked toward the window. Mom's home. Both of them froze. For a moment, Daniel stood up slowly. His heart was beating faster now. but his face remained calm. He had always believed problems should be faced directly. Running away never solved anything. He picked up the tablet again and walked toward the hallway. Ethan followed behind him nervously. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Laura stepped inside, shaking rain from her coat. "Wow, it's pouring out there," she said casually. She placed her purse on the table near the door and looked toward the living room. Then she saw Daniel and Ethan standing there. Both of them were unusually quiet. Laura frowned slightly. "Everything okay?" she asked. Daniel stepped forward and raised the tablet slightly. "Who's Mark?" he asked. The reaction on Laura's face was immediate. Her eyes widened for a split second. Pure shock appeared in her expression. That moment told Daniel everything. He needed to know if there had been an innocent explanation. She would have given it immediately. Instead, Laura stood completely still. "I can't explain," she said slowly. Daniel felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. "Then explain," he replied. Laura looked from Daniel to Ethan, realizing the situation fully. "You both read it?" she asked quietly. Ethan crossed his arms. "It popped up," he said. I wasn't looking for it." Laura closed her eyes briefly as if trying to gather her thoughts. She walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. Daniel remained standing. The distance between them suddenly felt much larger than a few feet. "I met him at work," Laura said after a long pause. Daniel listened carefully. "How long ago?" he asked. Laura hesitated. "About 6 months." The number felt like a knife in Daniel's chest. 6 months of hidden conversations. 6 months of lies. "At first we were just friends," Laura continued. "We talked during lunch breaks, sometimes after meetings." Daniel's voice remained steady, and then Laura looked down at her hands. Then it became more. Ethan looked away, clearly uncomfortable hearing this. Daniel noticed and spoke calmly. Double quotes, "Ethan, go to your room." His son hesitated. "Dad, please." Ethan nodded slowly and walked down the hallway. Now only Daniel and Laura remained in the living room. The rain outside grew louder. Daniel finally sat down across from her. "You should have told me," he said quietly. Laura's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how." Daniel shook his head. "That's not a reason." Laura wiped her eyes. "I felt lonely," she admitted softly. Daniel looked at her in disbelief. "Lonely?" "Yes," she whispered. "You were always busy with work, and Ethan is growing up. I started feeling invisible." Daniel let out a quiet breath. Being lonely doesn't give you permission to betray someone. Laura had no answer to that. The silence stretched between them again. Finally, Daniel asked the question that had been sitting heavily in his chest. "Do you love him?" Laura hesitated. That hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but to Daniel it felt like an eternity. And in that moment, Daniel understood the truth. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something deeper. Laura slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. "I think I do," she said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of 20 years. Daniel felt something inside him break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture in the center of his heart. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a moment. All the memories of their life together passed through his mind. Their wedding day, the moment Ethan was born, family vacations, holiday mornings, everything that once felt permanent now seemed fragile. Laura began crying softly. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. Daniel finally looked back at her. "But you did," he replied. Neither of them raised their voices. There was no shouting, only the quiet truth of what had happened. Down the hallway, Ethan stood outside his room listening, his chest tight with worry. Inside the living room, the future of the Carter family hung uncertain in the air. And in that moment, Daniel realized something painful. Life could change in a single night. One conversation, one truth, one betrayal. Nothing would. Ever feel the same again? The room felt heavier after Laura's confession. I think I'm in love with him. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Daniel Carter stayed still for a moment, letting them sink in. He didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He simply sat down slowly on the couch as if the weight of 20 years of marriage had suddenly pressed down on him. The rain outside beat steadily against the windows, a relentless rhythm echoing the storm inside the house. Ethan had gone. To his room, as his father asked, leaving Daniel and Laura alone for the first real confrontation since the truth had spilled out. Laura sat across from him, her hands trembling. Tears had formed in her eyes, but she tried to hide them, straightening her posture as if courage could come from standing tall. Daniel watched her carefully. There was guilt, fear, but also an unusual clarity in her expression, something he hadn't seen in months. She looked at him like a stranger who had just admitted something impossible. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he kept himself steady. This wasn't the moment for anger. It was the moment for understanding the depth of what had happened. I never meant to hurt you, Laura whispered, her voice barely above. The sound of the rain, Daniel exhaled slowly. You already did? He said softly. His voice carried the weight of years, the exhaustion of a man who had tried to ignore signs to hope things would be normal. Laura flinched at the words. She hadn't expected him to be so calm. There was anger in her mind, but he had quieted it without raising his voice. Daniel had realized early on that fury could destroy what remained, and right now, what remained was all that mattered. Laura's gaze dropped to her hands again. I didn't expect to fall in love with him, she admitted. Daniel let the words sit for a moment. He could feel the tension building around them. The long silence of months filled with secrets and small lies, now exploding in the space of a single night. That's usually how it happens, he said quietly, almost, as a statement of fact, not of judgment. Laura looked up, startled by the calmness in his tone. It was unexpected. Daniel studied her face. He could see regret, but also uncertainty. She had made choices, but now she seemed unsure about the path she had chosen. Aren't you afraid? He asked softly. Afraid of what this will do to your family? To us? Laura shook her head. I didn't think I'd feel this way. I didn't want it to happen, but it did. Daniel leaned back. So what now? The question was simple, but it carried everything. Everything he wanted to know. Everything that had kept him awake for weeks now demanded an answer. Laura hesitated, fidgeting with the edge of her coat. I don't know, she admitted. Daniel nodded. That was the honest answer. Nothing else could be said until she decided what she truly wanted. He didn't raise his voice, didn't push, he simply observed, letting her uncertainty speak for itself. Do you want to leave? He asked finally, not as a threat, not as a command, just as a question. Laura's eyes widened. What? If you're in love with him, Daniel said slowly, then say it. Don't hide it. Don't pretend for me, for Ethan, or for anyone else. Her hands trembled again. I don't want to hurt you, she said softly. Daniel's lips pressed together. That ship sailed already. The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they carried a finality. Nothing about this would be easy. Nothing about this would undo the betrayal. But confrontation was the first step toward clarity. Laura buried her face in her hands. I never imagined things would end like this, she admitted. Daniel glanced around the living room. Photos of family vacations, birthdays, holidays, they all stared back at him. 20 years of memories, laughter, love, all now fragile and trembling. Neither did I, he said softly. For a few moments, no one spoke. The room was heavy with tension, with grief, with the uncertainty of what was coming next. Daniel could feel it pressing down on him, threatening to break him, but he refused to move. He needed to understand, to make decisions with clarity, not with the impulse of pain. Laura finally looked up. What do we tell Ethan? Her voice was hesitant, careful. Daniel answered without hesitation. The truth. Laura nodded slowly. She knew he was right. Secrets had already shattered trust. Any more lies would only make the pain worse. She had to face reality. What about us? She whispered, almost to herself. Daniel's eyes met hers. Our marriage might be over, he said quietly. But we are still parents. We still have responsibilities. That doesn't disappear just because feelings change. Laura's shoulders slumped. I don't want to hurt him, she said. I don't want to destroy his family. Daniel reached out, placing a hand on her arm briefly. Some things are out of our control, he said gently. But being honest is the only way we can start fixing what's left. The sound of footsteps interrupted their conversation. Ethan had returned. His eyes were wide, his expression anxious. Are you guys okay? He asked. Daniel gave him a small, sad smile. We're trying, he said. Ethan looked at his mother. Are you leaving? Laura hesitated. I don't know yet, she admitted. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. No matter what happens, we're still your parents. It doesn't change. Ethan nodded, though the uncertainty in his eyes remained. He had seen the cracks in the family, felt them in the tension, the long silences, the unspoken questions. But he trusted his father's calm, his measured approach. Daniel turned back to Laura once Ethan had gone to his room. The house felt heavy with the aftermath of confession, but also with a strange sense of honesty. No more lies, no more secrets. For the first time in months, the air was clear enough to breathe. I don't know what happens next, Laura said. Softly, I don't know if I can, if I should. Daniel exhaled slowly. Neither do I, he admitted, but hiding it won't help. Pretending nothing happened won't help. We need to face it together as parents first, then we deal with us. Laura's eyes filled with tears again, but there was a sense of relief there too. Finally, she wasn't alone with the guilt, the confusion, or the fear. Daniel was here. They would confront the fallout together, at least for Ethan's sake. Daniel stood and walked to the window. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle now. We'll figure it out, he said quietly, step by step. No running, no pretending. Laura looked at him, understanding in her eyes. She didn't respond immediately, just nodded. She realized that whatever choice she made next, it wouldn't be simple. Feelings couldn't be erased, and love couldn't be forced. But honesty, finally, would be the foundation they needed to rebuild what they could. Daniel turned toward her. We still have decisions to make, he said. But whatever happens, we do it with Ethan in mind. That's what matters most. Laura swallowed, tears rolling down her cheeks. You're right, she said. And in that quiet moment, amidst the dampness of a Seattle evening and the remnants of betrayal, Daniel and Laura both understood something clearly. Life had changed, forever. Their marriage had been broken, but their family could survive if they faced the truth, no matter how painful it was. Outside, the rain stopped entirely. Inside, the Carter house felt heavy, yes, but alive with possibility. A storm had passed, but the air was fresh, ready for the choices that would come next. Neither Daniel nor Laura knew exactly what the future held. But one thing was certain, their lives would never be the same. And the days ahead would test them in ways they had never imagined. Daniel finally allowed himself to sit back down. He rubbed his forehead, feeling exhaustion, heartbreak, but also a quiet resolve. This was not the end, he realized. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one full of difficult choices, painful truths, and the slow, uncertain journey toward healing. And neither of them could predict what that journey would demand. But one thing was certain, honesty, even when it hurt, was the only path forward. And for Daniel, that fragile thread of truth, fragile though it might be, was worth holding on to. no matter how hard the days ahead would be. Ethan's soft footsteps echoed from his room again, a reminder of why they needed to stay strong. For him, for the family that remained, and for the fragile hope that one day even heartbreak could lead to something better. The night ended quietly, with rainwater pooling along the windowsills and a soft stillness filling the house. Daniel and Laura sat in silence, each lost in thought, each aware that the coming days would demand courage, patience, and honesty in ways neither of them had ever faced before. And in that stillness, they realized the truth. Love, even when betrayed, could not be erased. It had only changed its shape, and how they chose to respond to it would define everything that came next.